Rabbi, with permission, but he should. Fellow members and guests, a story is told about a 16th century Spanish theologian and poet. His name was Luis de Leon. He was imprisoned by the Inquisition. Released after 5 years, he stood the next day at his lectern, which you can still see in the University of Salamanca, and he said, reportedly, "As we were saying yesterday." Now, there is a Hebrew expression, lahavdil, which means make a difference. And you use it when you compare two completely dissimilar things which can be compared on one tangential point only. So I have to say, lahavdil, as we were saying when last I spoke here, not 5 years ago, in December 2023, in 1916, this synagogue decided to use what it called, or what the council minute calls, the Portuguese pronunciation. But I didn't have time then to explain why. And later in conversation, Rabbi Alexandra suggested, I think, what must be the reason. Claude Goldsmith Montefiore, who was one of the founders of the LJS, was a member of what is now the Reformed Synagogue in Upper Berkeley Street. And that synagogue was founded, or arose from a split in the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in the city in Bevis Marks. But the members of Bevis Marks who moved to the new synagogue continued to use their pronunciation. And I suppose that Montefiore suggested that it would be a good idea for the LGS to use it, because that would, of course, unify the pronunciation in the LJS, because people came from many different synagogues. So, having tied up loose ends, today I want to talk about what you may have heard is called sometimes the laying on of hands. The Christian practice, of course, reflects what I read this morning. Moses laying his hands on Joshua to continue to pass his authority to Joshua. And we preserve that in the word that we use. Now, v'samachta, you shall lay your hands. Vayismoch Moshe, and Moses laid his hands. And just this morning, as we read the Amidah, we all said, somech nofelim, he raises those who fall. You raise by laying your hands on people and helping them to stand up. We call this semicha when it's a rabbinical ordination, and semicha, of course, is derived from semecha, vayismoch. A new rabbi receives semicha from a senior one. Now, the persistence of the word throughout the centuries has led me to think of symbolic acts in Judaism. And I thought about the symbolic acts that we practice, so many of them. Pesach, the Seder, with all its food symbols, spilling of wine, leaning at table. Shavuot, we decorate the synagogue with flowers. The shofar on Rosh Hashanah, fasting on Yom Kippur, sitting in the sukkah on Sukkot, and lighting, excuse me, and lighting the Hanukkah candles. We marry under the chuppah, the wedding canopy, and the bridegroom breaks a glass. This is a practice which, by very long tradition, going back possibly to the 4th century of the Common Era, is to remind us, so we hear, that we live in exile, we don't have a temple, therefore we cannot offer up the sacrifices which the Torah instructs us to do. Now, this is strange enough, considering that Reform and Liberal Judaism do not pray for the sacrificial system to be restored. Such prayers exist in the Orthodox liturgy, the Nusach, as it's called. Not that people take much notice of them, but they do exist. But what seems to me stranger is the habit in all Jewish communities, I think, to shout out immediately after the bridegroom breaks the glass, Mazal Tov. Everybody shouts Mazal Tov. Why just then? Is there a connection between the rebuilding of the temple and good luck? Can't see it. So I began to look more closely. The word mazal doesn't really mean luck, and we don't really use it when we mean luck. We usually use it when we say congratulations. Yes, but the word means a planet, Jupiter, Venus, Mars. So yes, Jews are into astrology. Seems a little bit strange, especially since the Torah, or rather the Talmud, says, En mazal liYisrael. There is no fortune. How kind of you. Thank you very much. There is no mazal. No planet affects Israel. They have no agency. They are commanded by the Lord, by the Eternal One. And our great scholar of the Middle Ages, Maimonides, simply called belief in planets and stars and astrology he uses the very powerful Hebrew word, shtuyot, rubbish, absolute rubbish. But nothing seems to stop us, all of us, saying Mazal Tov when we hear a good piece of news. And in some synagogues, it's more than that. I don't know if the LGS does this. On any festive occasion, they start singing a little ditty which goes Mazal Tov, Siman Tov, Siman Tov, Mazal Tov. Siman is a sign of the zodiac. So are we into horoscopes? Is it Mystic Meg? What's that got to do with the temple? Nothing, in my opinion. And so we have to look at the other side of the equation. Perhaps breaking the glass is not actually in mourning for the temple, because one discovers, if one reads into the customs of many peoples, that many cultures accompany weddings with loud and unpleasant noises. Greeks, I understand, break plates. Other peoples bang saucepans, apparently, outside the house where the newlyweds are spending their first night together. And here in England, I don't know if you've seen this, I've never seen it, but I've seen it on the cinema. People tie tin cans, empty tin cans, yes, I see you nodding, to the back of the car, or it used to be the horse and carriage, which was taking the newlyweds off on their honeymoon. So what's it all for? Well, it's to scare away evil spirits. And that makes sense. If you want good luck for the couple, you frighten off the evil spirits and you try to summon a fortunate planet. And then the penny dropped. I think that our rabbis and sages were unable to prevent people breaking the glass. They knew it was a pagan custom. But trying to scare off evil spirits without the help of the divine actually is wrong for us, because in fact we are very strictly forbidden to go in for anything like witchcraft or soothsaying or spell casting, and anybody who says that he can get rid of evil spirits for you, you can only do this in our tradition by the help of the Almighty. It doesn't matter. You can't stop people doing it. I wonder if you have ever heard, I think it's going out of date now, people see a beautiful baby. They go around it. What a lovely child. And they say, in English, or not English actually, Kanena Hora. You've ever heard it? Or a very old person. How old is this? 99, Kanena Hora. Let him live to 120 or something like that. That is a distorted version, a distorted exclamation in Yiddish mixed with Hebrew. Kain Ein Hara. No evil eye. We believe in the evil eye? Well, yes, it's actually in the Orthodox liturgy, but you ask for protection from the Almighty for it. That's the point. So it's a little bit, these things like crossing your fingers or touching wood, although those have, of course, been changed into something of Christian significance in this country. And that's what I would suggest happened with the breaking of the glass. I think that the rabbis of old times probably wanted to stop it. It's a pagan practice, but they couldn't. People are very obstinate about this. And so they decided to give it an appropriate Jewish explanation, mourning for the temple. And I would surmise that early liberal Judaism, I have to say surmise, I'm speculating, might also have wished to get rid of that custom, which is rather grotesque, possibly. people would have none of it. They want the glass. They want to hear the glass being broken. So now we have devised new and more appropriate meanings for the practice. So let me bring this to a close. I think you might be asking yourselves, why hasn't he mentioned something which we all do, or almost all of us, I suggest, do, probably the most common ceremonial practice, symbolic practice that we have, which is lighting the candles on the eve of Shabbat and festivals. So you may say, well, we are commanded to do so. It's not a superstition or anything like that. True enough, and so we say when we light the candles on Shabbat, V'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, and he has commanded us to light the Sabbath light. But you won't find that commandment in the Torah. It is an example of quite remarkable, in my opinion, quite courageous also, early rabbinic creativity. Now we read also in the Amidah, Yismechu v'malchutcha shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg, those who call it an oneg, a delight, shall take pleasure in Shabbat. That's what we read. Isaiah has the most famous, I think, quotation on this, Isaiah chapter 58. V'karata la Shabbat oneg, and you shall call the Sabbath a delight. You can't have a delightful Sabbath, if you're sitting in the dark and cold. And so the rabbis simply had to invent a way in which we could obey the commandment and also have a Shabbat which was a delight, chemdat yamim, as we also said, the most cherished of days. And so we light the candles symbolically. And presently, we shall be declaring the special nature, the kedusha, that's what it means, in what is called kiddush, which is verbal now, mean to do the act of Shabbat. And of course, we shall be saying together with great joy. Why joy? Because we're having a glass of wine. Why with wine? Because the preacher, the Kohelet, this book I think is called in English Ecclesiastes, it's a latter book of the Bible, I believe composed, or it's said to be composed by King Solomon and Melech Shlomo, says, Hayayin mesameach, wine makes you happy, and that's why we do it. And that is why I now also, with great joy and happiness and content, and grateful for the privilege of being able to talk to you for a few minutes, say to you, Shabbat Shalom.